Welcome back to Her True Stories, where we share real accounts of justice, consequence, and the incredible power that comes from being underestimated. I'm your host, and today we have a story that will change how you think about family loyalty and the dangerous assumption that age equals weakness. This is the story of Elaine Carter, a 70-year-old woman who found her belongings packed in garbage bags at her son's gate, along with the crushing words, "You just turned 70. Go get a job and stop being a pest." What happened next is a masterclass in strategic revenge that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about sweet elderly mothers. If you've ever been dismissed because of your age, if you've ever been treated like a burden by people who should love you, if you've ever wondered what happens when someone pushes the wrong person too far, this story is for you. Elaine's journey from discarded mother to puppet master will show you that some people mistake kindness for weakness at their own peril. Before we begin, I want you to hit that like button if you believe actions have consequences, and subscribe to our channel if you're ready to hear more stories of justice served cold. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful testimonies of resilience and strategic payback. Now, let's dive into Elaine's story. But I have to warn you, what her son and daughter-in-law did to her will break your heart, and what she did in response will leave you in awe. This is a story about the deadly mistake of underestimating a woman who's lived 7 decades and learned every lesson life has to teach. Here's what happened when a 70-year-old woman decided to show her family what a real pest looks like. My name is Elaine Carter, and at 70 years old, I learned that some people mistake kindness for weakness. They shouldn't. It was a Tuesday evening in September when I discovered that my son Greg and his wife Melissa had packed my entire life into black garbage bags and left them by their front gate like trash waiting for pickup. I had been living with them for 8 months after selling my house, not because I needed to, but because Greg had insisted. "Mom, you shouldn't be alone at your age," he had said with that concerned smile I now knew was fake. "Come stay with us. We have plenty of room." What I didn't realize was that I wasn't a welcomed guest. I was a burden they were planning to discard. I pulled into their driveway that evening after my weekly bridge game with the ladies at the community center. The sight of those black bags lined up against their pristine white gate made my blood run cold. For garbage bags containing everything I owned, my clothes, my photographs, my late husband William's books, the china set that had been in my family for 3 generations. Disposed of like refuse. Greg and Melissa stood on their perfectly manicured front lawn, watching me with expressions that ranged from uncomfortable to openly hostile. Melissa's arms were crossed, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail that made her sharp features even more severe. Greg couldn't meet my eyes, but his jaw was set in that stubborn way that reminded me painfully of his father. "Mom," Greg said as I got out of my car, his voice carrying the tone one might use with a misbehaving child. "We need to talk." I walked slowly toward the bags, my heels clicking against their brick driveway. Each step felt like walking toward an execution. "I can see that." "Look, this isn't working out," Melissa said, her voice sharp with barely concealed irritation. "You're 70 years old, Mom. You need to figure out your own life instead of depending on us."
Mom.
She called me Mom when it suited her purpose, but I had heard her refer to me as Greg's baggage when she thought I wasn't listening. "You just turned 70, Greg added, as if my age was some kind of personal failing. "Go get a job and stop being a pest."
A pest.
My own son called me a pest. I looked at these 2 people, my son, whom I had raised alone after William died when Greg was only 12, and his wife, whom I had welcomed into our family with open arms, and felt something inside me crystallize into perfect, cold clarity. "I see," I said quietly. "We've been supporting you for months," Melissa continued, warming to her theme. "The groceries, the utilities, the space you take up. We're not running a charity here."
Supporting me.
As if the $2,000 I gave them monthly for expenses was nothing. As if the inheritance I had already signed over to Greg, nearly $50,000 to help with their mortgage, had been a gift from strangers. "We thought you'd understand," Greg said, still not meeting my eyes. "You're old enough to take care of yourself. It's time to be independent." Independent. At 70. After raising him, supporting him through college, helping him buy his first house, being there for every crisis and celebration of his adult life. I bent down and picked up one of the garbage bags. It was heavier than I expected, filled with the weight of a lifetime's worth of memories now deemed worthless. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. "That's not our problem anymore," Melissa said with a shrug. "You're a grown woman. Figure it out." I straightened up, that garbage bag in my hands, and looked at my son. Really looked at him. When had he become this stranger? When had the sweet boy who used to make me Mother's Day cards become this cold man who could throw his mother away like trash? "You want me to leave?" I said. It wasn't a question. "We think it's best for everyone," Greg said, finally meeting my eyes. "You'll be happier on your own."
I smiled then.
Not a sad smile or a bitter smile, but something else entirely. Something that made Greg take a small step backward. "Of course," I said. "I understand completely." I loaded the 4 garbage bags into my car with careful precision, arranging them in my trunk and back seat like they contained precious cargo. Greg and Melissa watched from their lawn, probably expecting tears or arguments or desperate pleas for reconsideration. They got none of those things. "Thank you," I said as I closed my car door, "for teaching me exactly who you are." I drove away, without looking back, my hands steady on the steering wheel, my mind already working. In my rearview mirror, I could see them still standing there, probably wondering why I hadn't fought harder to stay. They would understand soon enough. What Greg and Melissa didn't know, what they had never bothered to ask about, was that I wasn't the helpless old woman they thought I was. William had been brilliant with money, and I had learned from the best. The house I'd sold wasn't just my home. It was an investment property worth $800,000. The inheritance I'd given Greg was pocket change compared to what William had left me. Hidden in various accounts, investment portfolios, and trust funds was over $3.2 million. Money that Greg and Melissa knew nothing about because they'd never shown enough interest in my life to ask. But there was something else they didn't know. Something that would make their casual cruelty very, very expensive. William's technology company, the one he'd built from nothing and sold for millions just before his death, had spawned several smaller ventures. One of those ventures was a startup called TechFlow Solutions, the same company where Greg worked as a senior project manager. The same company where I still held controlling interest through a series of shell corporations and investment groups. The same company that could make or break Greg's precious career with a single board decision. I checked into a hotel that night, a nice one because I could afford it, and sat in my room, surrounded by those garbage bags. As I unpacked my life piece by piece, I made plans. Greg wanted me to be independent. I would show him what true independence looked like. Melissa thought I was a pest. I would show her what a real pest could accomplish. They had thrown me away like garbage, expecting me to disappear quietly into whatever fate awaited discarded old women. Instead, I would teach them that some garbage comes back to haunt you. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Greg's number. For a moment, I considered calling him, telling him about the money, about TechFlow, about how badly he had miscalculated. But then I deleted his number instead. Some lessons are more effective when they unfold slowly, like a flower blooming in reverse. My revenge would be patient. It would be subtle.
And it would be devastating.
After all, I had nothing but time. Before we continue with Elaine's incredible journey of justice, I want to share something important with you. If you've ever been told you're too old to start over, let me tell you, that's a lie. Your story isn't over, and you still have chapters left to write. Our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, is filled with simple, powerful steps to help you heal, rebuild, and fall in love with life again. Click the link in the description box and start your new beginning today. And if Elaine's story is speaking to your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful stories of resilience and justice. Trust me, you won't want to miss what Elaine does next, because when you underestimate a woman who's lived 70 years, you're about to learn a very expensive lesson. The next morning, I woke up in my hotel room and did something I hadn't done in months. I smiled while looking in the mirror. At 70, I was still a beautiful woman. My silver hair was perfectly styled, my skin clear and elegant, my eyes sharp with intelligence. Greg and Melissa saw an old woman to be discarded. I saw a weapon they had foolishly underestimated. I spent the morning making phone calls. Mrs. Carter, Harold Morrison, my financial advisor, sounded delighted to hear from me. How are you settling in with Greg and his wife? There's been a change of plans, Harold. I need to schedule a meeting. Today, if possible. Of course. Is everything all right? Everything is about to be perfect. Harold's office was in the financial district downtown, a gleaming tower of glass and steel where serious money moved in serious ways. I dressed carefully for our meeting, a navy blue suit that William had always said made me look formidable, pearl earrings that caught the light, and the subtle confidence that comes from knowing you hold all the cards. Elaine, Harold stood as I entered his office, concern creasing his features. You look wonderful, but you sound different on the phone. I feel different. I settled into the leather chair across from his massive oak desk. Harold, I need you to walk me through every investment, every account, every piece of financial leverage I have access to. That's quite a comprehensive review. May I ask why? I smiled that same smile I'd given Greg and Melissa. Let's call it a reallocation of priorities. Harold spread the documents across his desk like a general planning a campaign. As he talked, I listened with the focused attention of someone preparing for war. The numbers were even better than I'd remembered. William's careful investments had grown substantially over the past 5 years. My stock portfolio was worth $1.8 million. My real estate holdings, including several rental properties I'd almost forgotten about, totaled $900,000. And then there were the more complex investments. The shell companies, the tech startup shares, the investment groups that held pieces of various enterprises. Techflow Solutions, I said when Harold reached that part of the portfolio. Tell me about my holdings there.
Ah, yes.
This is one of William's most prescient investments. You currently own 31% of the company through various holding companies. Not quite controlling interest, but close to it. The company has grown significantly in recent years. Your stake is now worth approximately $400,000. And if I wanted to influence company decisions? Harold raised an eyebrow. With 31%, you'd be the largest single shareholder. Combined with proxy votes you could likely gather from smaller investors, you could potentially sway major decisions. Why do you ask? My son works there. Greg? That's wonderful. What a small world. Isn't it just? I spent the next hour learning about corporate mechanisms I'd never needed to understand before. How shareholder pressure could influence hiring decisions. How investment withdrawals could affect company stability. How a major shareholder could request audits, demand budget reviews, and generally make life very uncomfortable for management. I want to be more active in my investments, I told Harold. Less passive, more engaged. That's an excellent approach for someone in your position. Being involved protects your interests. If only he knew how involved I was planning to become. That afternoon, I drove past Greg and Melissa's house. Their garbage bags were gone from the gate, probably picked up by the actual trash collectors. How fitting. The house looked perfect from the outside. Pristine lawn, expensive cars in the driveway, the kind of suburban success that Greg was so proud of. A success built on credit, loans, and a job at a company I could influence with a few well-placed phone calls. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. But I made mental notes. The new landscaping they couldn't really afford, the luxury SUV that Melissa drove, the signs of a lifestyle that required Greg's steady corporate income to maintain. A lifestyle that was more fragile than they realized. That evening, I bought a small notebook, leather-bound, expensive, the kind of journal that important thoughts deserved. On the first page, I wrote, Day 1. The education of Greg and Melissa. They wanted independence. They shall have it. They wanted me gone. I am gone. They wanted to discard me like garbage. Let's see how they handle being discarded in return. Lesson 1. Be careful who you underestimate. William used to say that patience was the most dangerous virtue, because patient people never strike until they're certain of victory. Today, I became certain. I closed the journal and placed it on the hotel room's desk. Tomorrow, I would begin the slow, methodical process of teaching my son and his wife that throwing away family comes with consequences. But tonight, I ordered room service, opened a bottle of wine, and enjoyed the profound peace that comes from having a plan. For 8 months, I had been their unwanted guest, watching them live their self-centered lives, pretending not to notice the eye rolls and heavy sighs when I spoke, pretending not to hear Melissa's complaints about having to deal with her when she thought I was asleep. I had been patient then because I loved my son and wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. That patience was over. Now I would be patient for a different reason, because revenge, done properly, was an art form that required time to appreciate. I raised my wine glass to the mirror and smiled at my reflection. Here's to new beginnings, I said aloud. After all, they were right about one thing. It was time for me to be independent. They just had no idea what my independence was going to cost them. The next morning, I made my first move. TechFlow Solutions, this is Amanda. How may I help you? This is Elaine Carter, representing the Morrison Investment Group. I'd like to schedule a meeting with your CEO regarding our holdings in your company. There was a pause. One moment, please, Mrs. Carter. Within 30 minutes, I had a meeting scheduled for Thursday afternoon with James Sullivan, TechFlow's CEO. When you own 31% of a company, people make time for you very quickly. I spent the next 2 days preparing like a general planning a siege. I studied TechFlow's financial reports, employee structure, and current projects. Most importantly, I studied Greg's position within the company. He was a senior project manager in the development division, overseeing 3 major client accounts worth approximately $2.3 million annually. His salary was $95,000, good money, but not enough to support the lifestyle he and Melissa had built. They were leveraged to the hilt, dependent on his annual bonuses and the assumption that his career trajectory would continue upward, an assumption I was about to test. Thursday afternoon, I dressed in my most conservative business attire and met James Sullivan in his corner office. He was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 45, with a kind of aggressive energy that had probably built TechFlow from a startup into a mid-sized success. Mrs. Carter, it's a pleasure to meet you. I have to admit, we've been wondering when our largest individual shareholder would want to get more involved. I believe in staying informed about my investments, Mr. Sullivan. Please call me James. And I want you to know how much we appreciate the Morrison Group's continued confidence in our company. I smiled and opened my briefcase. Actually, James, I wanted to discuss some concerns I have about operational efficiency. For the next hour, I asked pointed questions about budget allocation, employee performance metrics, and project oversight. I didn't mention Greg by name, but I made it clear that I was particularly interested in the development division. The Morrison Group has always believed that successful companies require constant evaluation of their human resources, I said. We'd like to see more detailed performance reviews of senior management positions. Of course. We can provide quarterly reports on all department heads. Excellent. I'm also curious about your criteria for advancement and retention. In our experience, some employees become comfortable in their positions and lose the drive that made them valuable initially. James nodded enthusiastically. We've actually been discussing performance improvement initiatives. It's crucial to maintain high standards. I couldn't agree more. I left that meeting with a promise that TechFlow would begin more rigorous performance evaluations within the month. I also left with James Sullivan's direct phone number and an invitation to call anytime I had concerns about the company's direction. That evening, I sat in my new apartment, a lovely two-bedroom place in an upscale building that I'd rented using my real name, not that Greg would think to look for me there, and wrote in my journal. Day 5. The net begins to tighten. Patience is everything. Too fast, and they'll know it's intentional. Too slow, and the lesson loses impact. But carefully applied pressure, gradually increased, that's how you reshape a life. Greg believes his job is secure. He believes his performance speaks for itself. He has no idea that performance is often a matter of perspective, and perspective can be influenced by the right conversations with the right people. The next week, I made my second move. I had lunch with Margaret Haley, the president of Melissa's favorite charity organization, the one where Melissa volunteered exactly 4 hours per month so she could claim to be involved in the community. Mrs. Carter, what a lovely surprise. Margaret air-kissed my cheeks in the way that society women do. I haven't seen you since William's memorial service. How are you doing? Very well, thank you. Actually, I wanted to discuss the Morrison Foundation's charitable giving. Margaret's eyes lit up. The Morrison Foundation was one of William's lasting legacies, a charitable organization that distributed $50,000 annually to various causes. As the foundation's director, I had complete discretion over where that money went. We're always grateful for the foundation's support, Margaret said carefully. I've been reviewing our recipient organizations, I said, sipping my tea. We want to ensure our donations are going to groups with truly committed volunteers. Absolutely. Community involvement should be meaningful, not just for show.
Exactly.
I've heard wonderful things about Melissa Patterson's involvement with your organization. Margaret's smile faltered slightly.
Oh, yes.
Melissa. She tries to help when she can.
I see.
And how would you characterize her level of commitment? Margaret looked uncomfortable. Well, she's quite busy with her other commitments. Of course. The foundation is particularly interested in supporting organizations where volunteers demonstrate genuine dedication. We find that half-hearted involvement often reflects poorly on the organization's overall mission. I understand completely. Perhaps you could provide me with a report on volunteer participation levels? For our records. By the time lunch ended, I was confident that Margaret Haley would take a much closer look at Melissa's minimal contributions. I was also confident that Melissa's social standing in their circle was about to become less secure. That afternoon, I drove past Greg and Melissa's house again. This time, I noticed something interesting. A small sign by their front gate advertising a neighborhood open house 2 streets over. I had an idea. I attended the open house, not because I was interested in buying, but because I knew it would be full of Greg and Melissa's neighbors. People love to gossip about real estate prices and who can afford what in their area. Are you looking to move to the neighborhood? Asked a woman who introduced herself as Sandra, apparently the local busybody.
Possibly, I said.
I'm recently widowed and looking for a fresh start. Oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. There are some lovely people in this area. Very stable families. That's what I'm hoping for. I've heard mixed things about some residents. You know how it is, some people live beyond their means, and it can affect property values. Sandra's eyes gleamed with the joy of someone about to share gossip. Oh, you mean the Pattersons? I feigned ignorance. I don't know the names. Greg and Melissa, 2 streets over. They've been leveraging their house for years, constantly refinancing. And that car of hers, way too expensive for what he makes. People talk, you know. How unfortunate. Financial instability in a neighborhood can be concerning. By the time I left the open house, I had planted seeds of doubt about Greg and Melissa's financial stability with at least 6 neighbors. In a community where status mattered, reputation was everything. That night, I made one final call. Davidson and Associates, this is Jennifer. This is Elaine Carter. I'd like to schedule a consultation regarding property management services. Davidson and Associates managed several of my rental properties, but they also provided other services, including private investigation and background checks for landlords. Services that could be very useful for someone who wanted to know exactly how precarious their target's financial situation really was. What type of consultation, Mrs. Carter? I'm considering some property investments in the suburban market. I need detailed financial profiles on potential neighborhoods, including resident stability and debt-to-income ratios. We can certainly help with that. Do you have specific addresses you'd like us to research? I gave them Greg and Melissa's address, along with several others on their street to make it look routine. We'll have a comprehensive report for you within a week. I hung up and smiled. Within days, I would know exactly how much debt Greg and Melissa carried, what their monthly obligations were, and how close they were to financial disaster. Information was power, and power was about to become very useful. In my journal that night, I wrote, Day 8. The foundation cracks before the earthquake. They thought discarding me would be simple. They thought I would disappear quietly into whatever fate awaits unwanted old women. They were wrong. Greg wants independence? I'm giving him exactly what he asked for. Independence from my money, my connections, my protection. Let's see how independent he really is. Tomorrow the real work begins. I closed the journal and prepared for bed. Soon, Greg would start noticing that his perfectly ordered life was becoming less perfect, and he would have no idea why. 2 weeks after I began my campaign, Greg's carefully constructed world started showing its first cracks. I was having my morning coffee in a charming cafe downtown when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mrs. Carter, this is James Sullivan from TechFlow. Could you call me when convenient? Some developments I'd like to discuss. I waited exactly 3 hours before calling back, long enough to seem busy, not so long as to seem uninterested. Elaine, thank you for calling back. I wanted to update you on those performance reviews you suggested. Of course. How are they progressing? Very interesting results. We've identified several areas where we can improve efficiency. In fact, we've had to put some projects on hold pending restructuring. I kept my voice carefully neutral. Oh, which projects? 3 of them, actually. All in the development division. We've discovered some concerning patterns in project management, missed deadlines, budget overruns, communication gaps with clients. Greg's projects. The ones that generated his bonuses and justified his salary. That does sound concerning, I said. What's your plan for addressing these issues? We're implementing new oversight protocols immediately. More stringent reporting requirements, daily check-ins, client satisfaction audits. Some employees are adjusting to the changes better than others. I could imagine how Greg was adjusting to having his every move scrutinized. He had always been proud of his independence at work, his ability to manage projects without micromanagement. Change can be difficult, I said sympathetically, but necessary for growth. Exactly. I'll keep you updated on our progress. That afternoon, I received the report from Davidson and Associates. Reading it was like examining an X-ray of Greg and Melissa's financial bones and seeing multiple fractures. Their mortgage payment was $3,200 monthly. Melissa's car payment was $847. Credit card debt totaled approximately $23,000 across 4 cards. Greg's salary after taxes brought home about $6,100 per month. Their monthly expenses exceeded $5,800, leaving them a cushion of less than $300. They were living paycheck to paycheck, dependent on Greg's annual bonus to cover emergencies and vacations. Any disruption to his income would create immediate crisis. The report also revealed something interesting. They had recently applied for a home equity loan and been denied. Their debt-to-income ratio was already too high for additional borrowing. That evening, I drove past their house again. It was becoming a ritual, these reconnaissance missions. Tonight, I noticed Greg's car in the driveway at 7:30 p.m., much earlier than his usual 8:30 arrival. Through their front window, I could see animated figures in what appeared to be an intense conversation. I parked across the street and watched for 10 minutes. Even from a distance, their body language spoke of stress and conflict. My phone rang. "Hello, Mom." Greg's voice was tight, with barely controlled frustration. "It's me." I let silence stretch for a moment. "Greg, look, I wanted to check in. See how you're doing." "I'm doing very well, thank you. Where are you staying?" "We never talked about." "I'm quite comfortable." Another pause. "Mom, about what happened the other night. Maybe we were hasty." "Were you?" "Things have been stressful lately. Work stuff. I might have been harsh." Might have been harsh. As if calling me a pest and throwing my belongings in garbage bags was merely a communication error. "I see. Maybe we could have dinner sometime. Talk things through." "That's thoughtful of you to offer. So, yes. I'll consider it." "Mom, are you angry with me?" I smiled, alone in my car, watching his house glow in the suburban darkness. "Angry? Why would I be angry, dear?" You sound different. I feel different. Independence suits me." After I hung up, I sat in my car for another few minutes, watching their house. In the space of 2 weeks, Greg had gone from wanting me gone to wanting to reconnect. Interesting how quickly circumstances could change perspective. That night, I made my third strategic move. I called Patricia Williams, the wife of TechFlow's second-largest client. Patricia and I had been acquaintances for years through various charity functions, and she had always struck me as someone who appreciated directness. "Elaine, how lovely to hear from you. How are you managing?" "Very well, thank you." "Patricia, I wanted to ask you something confidentially." "Of course." "You know I have investments in various technology companies. I'm considering expanding my portfolio, and I've heard good things about TechFlow Solutions. Your husband's company works with them, doesn't it?" "Yes, David's been very pleased with their services."
Why?
"I'm doing my due diligence. You know how important it is to work with reliable partners." "Absolutely." David's always spoken highly of their project managers. Very professional. That's reassuring. I've heard some concerns about consistency in their development division, but perhaps those are unfounded. Concerns? What kind of concerns? Oh, probably nothing serious. Some talk about missed deadlines, communication issues. You know how rumors spread in business circles. That's strange. David hasn't mentioned any problems. I'm sure it's nothing. But you know how investors worry about operational efficiency. Of course. I'll mention it to David, see if he's noticed anything. I hung up knowing that David Williams would now be looking at TechFlow's performance through a more critical lens. When your largest clients start asking questions about reliability, companies tend to find scapegoats quickly. In my journal that night, I wrote, Day 16. The tremors begin. Greg called today. His voice carried the stress of a man whose perfect life is developing cracks he can't explain. Work pressure, financial strain, the gradual realization that his problems might not be coincidental. He wanted to have dinner, to talk things through. as if 20 minutes of conversation could undo months of treating me like an inconvenience. But I'm not ready for reconciliation. I'm not nearly finished with education. Tomorrow I'll plant more seeds. Patient pressure, carefully applied. Soon he'll understand what it feels like to have your security pulled away without warning. After all, he taught me himself, sometimes people need to be thrown away before they understand their value. I closed the journal and prepared for bed, already planning my next move. Greg wanted to talk. Soon, he would have much more pressing things to worry about than dinner with his discarded mother. 3 weeks into my campaign, I decided it was time to send a message. The idea came to me while I was reading the newspaper over breakfast. A small article about urban pest control caught my attention. Local company reports increase in residential rodent problems.
Perfect.
I spent the morning shopping for supplies. A pristine white box, the kind used for expensive gifts. Tissue paper. A small card with elegant script lettering. And one special item from a theatrical prop shop, a realistic but fake dead rat, the kind used in movies. That afternoon, I packaged everything carefully. The rat nestled in white tissue paper like a grotesque gift. The card simply read, "Pests have a way of coming back. A concerned neighbor." No signature. No return address. Just enough to plant a seed of paranoia. I mailed it to their house and waited. I didn't have to wait long. The next evening, my phone rang. Greg's number. "Hello. Mom, did someone send us something?" "I'm sorry." "A package. A white box. There was a dead rat inside." I let silence stretch, then made my voice concerned. "A dead rat? How horrible. Do you think it's some kind of prank?" "I don't know. Melissa is completely freaked out. She thinks someone is targeting us." "Targeting you? Why would anyone do that?" "I have no idea. That's why I'm calling. Have you heard anything? Neighborhood gossip, anything like that?" "I'm afraid I'm not really plugged into neighborhood gossip anymore, dear."
Right.
"Of course." Greg sounded defeated. I just thought, never mind. "Greg, are you all right? You sound stressed. Work has been challenging lately. More oversight, more pressure. And now this." "I'm sorry to hear that. Perhaps you should take some time off." "I can't afford to take time off right now."
Can't afford.
Interesting choice of words. Well, I'm sure things will improve.
Yeah.
Maybe. After we hung up, I sat in my comfortable apartment and imagined the scene at Greg and Melissa's house. The shock of opening that box. The questions with no answers. The growing sense that their perfect suburban life might not be as secure as they'd thought. I opened my journal and wrote, Day 22, the first gift delivered. Greg called, confused and frightened. The rat has done its job, not just the shock of receiving it, but the questions it raises.
Who would send such a thing? Why?
What did they do to deserve it? Paranoia is more effective than any direct attack. When people can't identify their enemy, they begin to suspect everyone. Melissa is completely freaked out. Good. Let her experience some of the fear she inflicted on me when she threw me away like garbage. 3 days later, I escalated. This time, the package was smaller, just a business card for a local extermination company with a handwritten note. Thought you might need this. The pest problem in your neighborhood is getting worse. The beauty of this approach was its subtlety. Anyone could have sent it. A concerned neighbor. Someone from the homeowners association. A rival at work. The lack of a clear source would make them question everyone around them. I also made another strategic phone call. Tech Flow Solutions Development Division, this is Susan. This is Mrs. Carter from Morrison Investment Group. Is James Sullivan available? He's in a meeting, but I can have him call you back. Actually, could you connect me with whoever oversees the Patterson account? That would be Greg Patterson. Would you like me to transfer you? No, thank you. I was actually calling about Mr. Patterson's performance on the Morrison accounts. There was a pause. I'm sorry. I think there might be some confusion. We don't have any Morrison accounts in Greg's portfolio. Oh, my mistake. I must have been thinking of our other technology investments. Never mind. But the damage was done. Susan would mention this call to someone, probably Greg himself. He would spend days trying to figure out why an investment group was asking about his performance on accounts he didn't manage. More paranoia. More questions with no answers. That evening, I decided to venture closer to the action. I drove to the shopping center near Greg and Melissa's neighborhood and had dinner at the chain restaurant where I knew Melissa sometimes met her friends. I was lucky. She was there, sitting at a table with two other women I recognized from various social functions. I chose a booth across the restaurant where I could observe without being noticed. Melissa looked terrible. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her makeup was minimal, and her designer clothes couldn't hide the tension in her shoulders. She was gesticulating wildly as she spoke to her friends, clearly upset about something. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could read the body language. Her friends were listening with the kind of polite attention that suggested they were already growing tired of whatever drama Melissa was sharing. When her friends left after an hour, Melissa sat alone at the table for another 20 minutes, staring at her phone. She looked isolated, frightened, confused.
Perfect.
On my way out, I stopped by her table. Melissa? What a surprise. She looked up, startled.
Oh, Elaine.
You look upset, dear. Is everything all right? Just life stuff. You know how it is. I do indeed. Sometimes life throws us challenges we never expected. She stared at me for a moment, as if trying to read some deeper meaning in my words. How are you doing? She asked finally. Greg said you're adjusting to being on your own. Thriving, actually. Independence has been very liberating. That's good. Yes, it really is. Sometimes we don't realize how much we need to change until it's forced upon us. I smiled warmly. You and Greg did me quite a favor, actually. Her face went pale.
A favor?
Oh, yes. Being thrown out of my comfort zone has opened up so many new opportunities. I've become much more active in my investments, more involved in community organizations. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you're motivated. I'm glad you're doing well. Better than well, dear. Much better. I left her sitting there with that cryptic comment hanging in the air. That night, I made one more call. Hello, is this David Williams from Williams & Associates? Yes, this is David. Mr. Williams, this is Elaine Carter. We met briefly at the Heritage Foundation Gala last year. Of course, Mrs. Carter. How can I help you? I wanted to follow up on our conversation about TechFlow Solutions. You mentioned that your company works with them? Yes, we've had a good relationship with TechFlow for about 2 years now. I've been doing more research on my potential investment, and I've heard some concerning things about their project management consistency. Have you experienced any issues? Well, now that you mention it, there have been a few hiccups lately. Nothing major, but some deadline slippages, communication gaps. We've been working with a project manager named Greg Patterson, and he seems to be under more pressure lately. Pressure? His responses have been slower. He seems less confident in his recommendations. It's probably just a busy period for them. Perhaps. But in my experience, when individual performance starts declining, it often reflects broader organizational issues. That's a good point. We've been very pleased with TechFlow overall, but we do expect consistency from our vendors. Of course. Reliability is everything in business relationships. Absolutely. I think I'll schedule a meeting with their management to discuss our expectations going forward. I hung up satisfied. David Williams would now be scrutinizing Greg's performance even more closely, and any mistakes would be magnified. In my journal that night, I wrote, Day 25, the net tightens. Saw Melissa tonight. She looks like a woman under siege, which is exactly what she is. The packages have shaken her confidence, made her question her security. Greg's work situation continues to deteriorate. Clients are asking questions, supervisors are watching more closely, colleagues are beginning to distance themselves from potential problems. The beauty of this approach is its inevitability. I'm not destroying their lives directly. I'm simply removing the protections and advantages they never realized they had. Their own weaknesses are doing the rest. They wanted to discard me like a pest. Now they're learning what it feels like to be infested by problems they can't identify or eliminate. Soon, they'll discover that some pests are much more dangerous than others. 2 days later, Greg called again. Mom, I need to ask you something directly. Of course. Are you doing something to us? I let silence stretch for several seconds. What do you mean? These packages, the problems at work, the feeling like someone is watching us. Melissa thinks you might be involved somehow. Melissa thinks I'm sending you dead rats? I know it sounds crazy. It sounds like you're both under a lot of stress, dear. Stress can make people paranoid, make them see connections that aren't there. But the timing. Greg, I'm 70 years old. I'm living quietly in a new apartment, minding my own business. What exactly do you think I'm capable of? I don't know. Perhaps you should focus on the real problems in your life instead of creating imaginary ones. What real problems? Oh, I'm sure you'll figure it out. I hung up and smiled. Greg was beginning to suspect the truth, but he couldn't prove anything. And even if he could, what would he do? Call the police and report that his elderly mother was sending him pest control advertisements? The paranoia was eating at him, just as I'd planned. Soon it would consume them both. After all, they had taught me that pests were problems to be eliminated. I was simply returning the favor. 1 month after beginning my campaign, I decided it was time to drop the financial hammer. I had been patient, methodical, allowing the smaller pressures to build like cracks in a foundation. But now Greg and Melissa needed to understand that their problems weren't random occurrences. They were consequences. I dressed in my most authoritative business suit and made an appointment with James Sullivan at TechFlow. This time, I wouldn't be subtle. Elaine, always a pleasure, James said as I settled into his office. I trust you're satisfied with the changes we've implemented? Actually, James, I have some concerns about the development division's performance. Oh, we've been monitoring the situation closely. Not closely enough, I'm afraid. My contacts at Williams & Associates have expressed dissatisfaction with their project management. Missed deadlines, communication failures, lack of leadership. James shifted uncomfortably. We're addressing those issues. Are you? Because from where I sit, it seems like you have a systemic problem centered around one individual. If you're referring to Greg Patterson, I'm referring to a project manager whose performance is jeopardizing client relationships and, by extension, my investment in this company. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a folder of documents I'd prepared. James, the Morrison Group has been very patient with TechFlow's growing pains. But patience has limits. If this company can't maintain consistent performance standards, we'll have to reconsider our position. His face went pale. Elaine, surely we can resolve any performance issues without drastic measures. Can you? Because what I'm seeing suggests a failure of leadership. When one employee's declining performance affects multiple client relationships, that's not an employee problem. That's a management problem. I leaned forward, my voice cold with authority. I want Greg Patterson removed from all major client accounts immediately. And I want a formal performance improvement plan implemented with a 30-day review period. That's a very significant action. My 31% ownership stake gives me significant influence in operational decisions. I'm exercising that influence. James nodded reluctantly. I'll have the paperwork prepared by tomorrow. Excellent. Oh, and James? I'll be monitoring this situation very closely. If Mr. Patterson's performance doesn't improve dramatically within 30 days, I'll expect more permanent solutions. I left that meeting knowing Greg's career at TechFlow was hanging by a thread. Losing his major accounts would mean losing his bonus structure, his professional reputation, and his sense of security. That afternoon, I made my second financial strike. I called Margaret Haley at Melissa's charity organization. Margaret, it's Elaine Carter. I wanted to follow up on our discussion about volunteer commitment. Oh yes, Elaine. I've been reviewing our volunteer records as you suggested. And what did you find? Well, Melissa Patterson's participation has been minimal. 4 hours total last month, mostly social events rather than actual volunteer work. I see. And how does that compare to your other volunteers? Our committed volunteers typically contribute 15 to 20 hours monthly. Melissa's involvement appears to be more about social networking than charitable service. That's disappointing. The Morrison Foundation has always prioritized supporting organizations with genuinely dedicated volunteers. I understand completely. I think we'll need to reconsider our donation for next year. Perhaps we should focus on organizations with more committed volunteer bases. Of course. Though I should mention, several board members have expressed concerns about Melissa's attitude as well. There have been complaints about her treating volunteer work as a social opportunity rather than meaningful service.
Perfect.
Melissa's social standing in their charity circle was crumbling. Margaret, I appreciate your honesty. It helps us make better donation decisions. That evening, I implemented my final financial maneuver. I called Harold Morrison with very specific instructions. Harold, I want to liquidate my TechFlow holdings strategically. Are you sure? The company's been performing well overall. I have inside information that suggests some operational instability. I want to sell 15% of my holdings immediately, and I want the transaction structured to create maximum market impact. That kind of sudden divestment could affect the stock price. Exactly. Elaine, if you don't mind me asking, what's prompted this decision? Let's call it a loss of confidence in management. Harold executed the trades the next morning. By noon, TechFlow's stock had dropped 12%, triggering automatic sell orders from other nervous investors. By closing, the company had lost nearly 20% of its market value. I knew James Sullivan would spend the day fielding panicked calls from investors and board members, all demanding explanations for the sudden market crash. And I knew he would be looking for someone to blame. That evening, Greg called. His voice was barely controlled panic. Mom, I've been fired. I let the words hang in the air for a moment. Fired? What happened? They removed me from all my accounts yesterday, said there were performance issues. Today they called me in and said they were eliminating my position. I'm so sorry to hear that. I don't understand it. My performance reviews have always been good. My clients were satisfied. And then suddenly, everything fell apart. These things happen in corporate environments, dear. But the timing, everything started going wrong right after you left. Are you suggesting I had something to do with your employment situation? I don't know what to think anymore. Greg, I'm a 70-year-old retired woman. What possible influence could I have over a technology company's personnel decisions? I know it sounds crazy, but it sounds like you're looking for someone to blame instead of taking responsibility for your own performance. That's not. Mom, we're in serious trouble. Without my salary, we can't make our mortgage payments. We can't afford the car payments. We don't have savings to fall back on. That sounds like a problem you should have considered before making those financial commitments. We need help. There it was. The admission I'd been waiting for. Help. Could we borrow some money? Just until I find another job. Borrow money from me? Please, Mom. I know we treated you badly, but we're desperate. You know, Greg, it's interesting. A month ago, you told me to get a job and stop being a pest. You threw my belongings in garbage bags and left them at your gate like trash. And now you want me to solve your financial problems? I know we made mistakes. Mistakes? Is that what you're calling it? Mom, please. I'm sorry. We're both sorry, but we need help. I savored the moment. The complete reversal of power. The desperation in his voice. I'll consider it, I said finally. Really? I'll consider whether helping you is in my best interests. Just as you considered whether keeping me in your home was in your best interests. Mom. I'll be in touch, Greg. I hung up and opened my journal. Day 32. The foundation crumbles. Greg has been fired. Their financial house of cards is collapsing exactly as I calculated. Now they need me, the pest they discarded, the burden they eliminated. He's asking for help, but he hasn't yet learned the real lesson. He thinks this is about money, about solving a temporary crisis. He doesn't understand that this is about respect, about consequences, about learning that some people shouldn't be thrown away. Soon, he'll discover that begging is much harder than apologizing. And I'm not nearly finished teaching. 2 weeks after Greg's termination, their carefully constructed world was in free fall. I learned this not from Greg directly, but from my network of informants, the social connections I'd spent decades building, and they'd never bothered to appreciate. Patricia Williams called me on a Tuesday morning with delicious gossip. Elaine, you'll never guess what I heard at the club yesterday. Tell me. That Patterson boy, you know, the one married to that blonde girl who barely volunteers, he had some kind of breakdown during a job interview. My pulse quickened. A breakdown? Complete meltdown, according to Sarah Henderson. Her husband was on the interview panel at Morrison Tech. They were considering Greg for a senior position, and halfway through his presentation, he just lost it. Lost it how? Started rambling about being sabotaged, claimed someone was manipulating his career behind the scenes. Then he actually stopped mid-sentence and stared at the wall like he was seeing something that wasn't there. I gripped the phone tighter. How strange. They had to call security to escort him out. Word is he's been having similar episodes at other interviews. Companies are starting to talk. No one wants to hire someone who seems unstable. After Patricia hung up, I sat in my apartment, processing this development. I hadn't expected Greg's paranoia to manifest in such public, destructive ways. The pressure I'd applied was psychological, but apparently it was having very real effects on his mental state. Interesting. That afternoon, I decided to gather more intelligence. I drove to the shopping center, where Melissa worked part-time at an upscale boutique, a job she'd taken to help with their mounting bills. I watched through the window as she folded clothes with the mechanical movements of someone whose spirit had been broken. Her usual polish was gone. Her hair was limp, her makeup minimal, her designer clothes replaced with the store's employee uniform. When I entered the boutique, she looked up with the practiced smile of a retail worker. Welcome to, Elaine. Hello, Melissa. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by. She glanced around nervously, as if worried her supervisor might object to personal conversations. How are you adjusting to everything? I asked, examining a cashmere sweater with the casual interest of a potential customer. We're managing. I'm sure. These transitions can be so difficult. Greg is actively interviewing, she said defensively. He'll find something soon. Of course he will. Though I imagine the job market is quite competitive for someone in his situation. His situation? Well, being terminated from a position, having to explain the circumstances to potential employers. It can create complications. Melissa's hands trembled slightly as she continued folding. The circumstances weren't his fault, weren't they? She looked at me sharply. What's that supposed to mean? Oh, nothing specific. Just that employers today are very cautious about hiring people who might bring workplace drama or instability. Workplace drama? Poor performance reviews, client complaints, sudden termination. These things follow people, create questions about reliability. I could see the impact of my words in her face, the growing realization that Greg's job search might be more difficult than they'd hoped. I should let you get back to work, I said, moving toward the door. Oh, and Melissa? Yes. I hope you're both learning valuable lessons from this experience. I left her standing there, visibly shaken. That evening, I made a strategic call to Thomas Morrison, CEO of Morrison Tech, the company where Greg had his breakdown. Thomas, this is Elaine Carter. I hope I'm not calling too late. Elaine. Not at all. How have you been? Very well, thank you. Thomas, I wanted to ask you about something rather delicate. Of course. I understand you recently interviewed someone named Greg Patterson for a position. Patterson, yes. Rather unfortunate situation, actually. I'm sorry to hear that. Greg is my son. Oh my. I had no idea. Elaine, I'm very sorry, but please don't apologize. I'm calling because I'm concerned about Greg's behavior lately. What you experienced during the interview, has it been reported to other companies? Well, word does travel in our industry. When someone has an episode during an interview, people talk. I understand. Thomas, I'm worried that Greg might be having some kind of mental health crisis. The stress of unemployment, financial pressure, it can affect people in unexpected ways. That would explain a lot. He seemed genuinely disturbed, kept talking about being undermined by invisible forces. Invisible forces? He claimed someone was sabotaging his career, manipulating his professional relationships. Classic paranoid ideation, if you ask me. How concerning. And this information has been shared with other potential employers. I'm afraid so. We have a responsibility to warn our colleagues about candidates who might be unstable.
Perfect.
Greg's mental state was now being discussed throughout the local business community. His reputation wasn't just damaged, it was toxic. Thomas, I appreciate your honesty. It helps me understand what we're dealing with. Is there anything I can do to help? Any resources you need? Just your discretion, if you don't mind. Family situations can be so delicate. Of course. After hanging up, I open my journal. Day 47. The mind breaks before the body. Greg's paranoia has become public knowledge. His behavior during interviews is erratic, unstable, desperate. Word is spreading through the business community that he's unreliable, possibly mentally ill. I didn't anticipate this level of psychological damage, but I'm not entirely surprised. Weak people break when pressure is applied consistently. Strong people adapt and overcome. Greg was always weak. He just never faced real adversity before. Melissa is beginning to understand the scope of their problem. This isn't a temporary setback. It's a complete life implosion. Soon, they'll have to face the choice I faced, accept their new reality or fight against forces they can't control. The difference is I had resources they never knew about. They have nothing but debt and desperation. Let's see how they handle the pressure. 3 days later, Greg called at 2 a.m.
Mom?
Are you awake? His voice was slurred, either from alcohol or exhaustion. I am now. Greg, it's 2 in the morning. I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see things. What kind of things? Garbage bags.
Rats. People whispering about me.
I know it sounds crazy, but I think someone is watching us. Greg, you sound like you need professional help. Professional help won't fix this. This isn't depression or anxiety. Someone is destroying my life deliberately. Who would do such a thing? Mom, I think it might be you. I let silence stretch for long seconds. Greg, that's a very serious accusation. I know it sounds insane. But the timing, the way everything started falling apart right after that night. After you threw me out like garbage?
Yes.
I know we handled that badly. Badly? You called me a pest and left my belongings in trash bags.
I'm sorry.
We were stressed. We made a mistake. And now you think I'm somehow orchestrating your professional downfall? I don't know what else to think. Here's what you should think, Greg. Actions have consequences. When you treat people cruelly, when you discard them without consideration, those choices create ripple effects. What does that mean? It means that maybe your problems aren't the result of a conspiracy. Maybe they're the result of your own behavior, your own weaknesses, your own poor decisions finally catching up with you. That's not. Or maybe, I continued, my voice growing colder, you're discovering that the old woman you threw away wasn't as powerless as you believed. I hung up, leaving him alone with that thought. Tomorrow, I would escalate again. Greg was beginning to understand the truth, but understanding wasn't enough. He needed to feel completely helpless, just as I had felt when I found my life packed in garbage bags. Greg's 2 a.m. phone call told me everything I needed to know. He was breaking down exactly as planned. But Melissa was proving more resilient than expected, and that required a different approach. I spent the next morning researching Melissa's daily routines. Social media made surveillance remarkably easy. Her Instagram posts revealed her schedule with clockwork precision. Yoga class on Tuesdays, grocery shopping on Wednesdays, coffee with friends on Fridays. What it also revealed was a woman desperately trying to maintain normalcy while her world collapsed. Her recent posts were carefully curated to hide their financial crisis, designer outfits that were probably borrowed, restaurant check-ins that were likely free samples from her retail job, smiling selfies that couldn't quite hide the strain around her eyes. But I could see the cracks, the forced brightness, the decreasing frequency of posts, the gradual disappearance of her social circle. That afternoon, I implemented my psychological campaign against Melissa. I started with her workplace. I called the boutique during her shift. Bella Boutique, this is Melissa. Melissa Patterson? Yes, how can I help you? This is Dr. Sarah Williams from Community Mental Health. I'm calling about your husband, Greg Patterson. I let that hang for a moment. I'm sorry, what about my husband? He was referred to our crisis intervention program following several concerning incidents. I understand you're his emergency contact.
Crisis intervention?
What incidents? Nam, I can't discuss details over the phone, but I wanted to schedule an appointment to discuss treatment options and family support resources. Treatment for what? Mr. Patterson is exhibiting signs of severe paranoid ideation and possible psychotic episodes. Has he been experiencing hallucinations or expressing fears about being watched or followed? Melissa's breathing became audible over the phone. He's been saying some strange things lately. I see. Mrs. Patterson, it's important that you understand how serious this situation is. Without proper intervention, this type of condition typically escalates. Escalates how? Patients often become increasingly erratic, potentially dangerous to themselves or others. They may experience complete breaks from reality. I could hear her trying to control her panic. What? What do I need to do? I'll need to meet with both of you as soon as possible.
Can you arrange that?
I'll try. Mrs. Patterson, if your husband refuses treatment or becomes agitated, don't hesitate to call our crisis line. Sometimes family members need protection during these episodes. After I hung up, I imagined Melissa standing in that boutique, surrounded by beautiful clothes and normal customers, trying to process the information that her husband might be mentally ill and potentially dangerous.
Perfect.
That evening, I escalated further. I waited until 11 p.m., then called their home phone. When Melissa answered, I hung up without speaking. I repeated this 3 more times over the next hour. Then I called from a different number. Hello? Melissa's voice was tight with anxiety. Pest, I whispered, then hung up. I made similar calls over the next 3 nights, always late, always brief. Sometimes I said nothing. Sometimes I whispered single words. Pest. Garbage. Thrown away. By the 4th night, they had stopped answering their phone entirely. But I knew they were listening. I knew Melissa was lying awake, wondering who was calling, what they wanted, why the words seemed so specifically chosen to hurt. During the day, I continued my legitimate harassment. I called Greg's references for his job applications, identifying myself as a concerned citizen who had information about his mental health status. I really think you should know, I told the HR director at Pinnacle Solutions, that Mr. Patterson has been exhibiting some concerning behaviors lately. Paranoid episodes, accusations against former employers, difficulty distinguishing reality from delusion. Thank you for bringing this to our attention, she replied. We'll certainly take that into consideration. I made similar calls to 6 other companies where Greg had pending applications. I also contacted their mortgage company. This is Elaine Carter. I'm calling about concerns regarding Greg and Melissa Patterson's mortgage account. Are you an authorized contact on this account? I'm Greg's mother, and I'm worried about their ability to maintain payments given his recent termination and apparent mental health crisis. I see. What kind of mental health crisis? He's been having paranoid episodes, making threats against former employers, exhibiting erratic behavior. His wife is concerned for her safety. That does sound concerning. We'll make a note in their file and monitor the situation. Every conversation was another nail in the coffin of their reputation. Soon, even if Greg found employment, their creditworthiness would be questioned, their applications scrutinized, their every financial move viewed with suspicion. Meanwhile, I continued my evening calls to their house. Always brief, always unsettling, always designed to feed Melissa's growing paranoia. On the 7th night, she answered with desperation in her voice. Who is this? What do you want? You know what you did, I whispered. I don't understand. Garbage bags. Thrown away like trash. I hung up and waited. 5 minutes later, my phone rang.
Greg.
Stop calling us. Greg? I know it's you, Mom. Stop calling our house. I haven't called your house. The whispered messages, the hang-ups. It's been going on for a week. Greg, you sound paranoid again. Have you been taking your medication? My medication? I'm not on medication. Perhaps you should be. Dr. Williams from the Mental Health Center seemed quite concerned about your condition. What mental health center? I never talked to any Dr. Williams. Didn't you? How strange. Melissa seemed to think you'd been referred for crisis intervention. She never. Mom, what's happening to us? I think you're both under a great deal of stress, dear. Stress can make people imagine things, hear things that aren't there. The phone calls are real. Are they? Have you considered that the stress of unemployment and financial pressure might be causing some perceptual disturbances? You're gaslighting me. I'm suggesting that you might need professional help before your condition deteriorates further. My condition? Paranoia, hallucinations, inability to maintain employment. Greg, these are serious symptoms. I'm not hallucinating. You're the one. I hung up, letting him finish that sentence into empty air. In my journal that night, I wrote, Day 54, the psychological siege intensifies. Melissa is cracking. The late-night calls, the whispered words, the constant uncertainty, it's breaking down her sense of security. She doesn't know who's calling or why, but she knows the words are connected to what they did to me. Greg's paranoia is now affecting his relationship with reality. He knows I'm responsible but can't prove it. The knowledge is eating at him, making him seem more unstable to everyone around him. Soon, they'll be too frightened to sleep, too paranoid to trust anyone, too damaged to recover their previous lives. They wanted to throw me away like a pest. Instead, they've discovered what it feels like to be infested by fear. Tomorrow, I'll increase the pressure. By the end of next week, they should be ready for the final lesson. After all, pests are most active in the dark. By week 8 of my campaign, Greg and Melissa had become social pariahs in their own neighborhood. I knew this because I had made it my business to know. Every Tuesday, I attended the community center's senior fitness class, not because I needed the exercise, but because it was attended by the wives and mothers of their entire social circle. "Have you seen Melissa Patterson lately?" whispered Janet Morrison. "She looks absolutely terrible." "I heard Greg lost his job," added Patricia Wells. "Some kind of performance issues." "Performance issues?" Sandra Hayes leaned in. "My Tom heard it was more serious than that. Mental breakdown during an interview. Had to be escorted out by security." I listened to these conversations with the satisfaction of an architect watching her building take shape. "And those strange phone calls they've been getting," continued Janet. "Melissa told Beth Henderson that someone's been harassing them for weeks." "Harassing them how?" "Calls in the middle of the night, whispered messages, threatening packages. Dead animals, pest control advertisements. Melissa thinks someone is targeting them deliberately." "But who would do such a thing?"
She has no idea.
"That's what's so frightening." I smiled, sipping my herbal tea while these women dissected my son and daughter-in-law's destruction with clinical interest. "I feel sorry for them," said Patricia, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But honestly, Greg always was a bit entitled. And Melissa never really contributed much to community activities."
True.
"Remember when she barely showed up for the charity auction planning? And the way she treated that sweet old mother of Greg's. What was her name? Elaine?" My pulse quickened. "Oh yes, Elaine Carter. Lovely woman. I heard Greg and Melissa just threw her out one day. Packed her things in garbage bags and left them at the gate." "That's horrible. Where did she go?" "No one knows. She just disappeared." Well, karma has a way of catching up with people. Indeed it did. That afternoon, I called the Homeowners Association president. "Marcus, this is Elaine Carter. I hope you remember me. I used to live with my son Greg Patterson." "Of course, Elaine. How are you?" "Very well, thank you. Actually, I'm calling about concerns regarding my former address. I've been hearing disturbing reports about activities that might affect property values." "What kind of activities?" "Late-night disturbances, possible mental health crises, concerning behavior. There have been reports of Greg having public breakdowns, and apparently someone has been sending them threatening packages." "That does sound serious. I'm concerned this kind of instability could attract negative attention to the neighborhood. And with their financial troubles on top of everything else." "Financial troubles?" "Greg was terminated, and apparently they're behind on mortgage payments. I worry about what desperate people might do." "This is very troubling. I'll need to discuss this with the board." 2 days later, Greg and Melissa received a formal letter from the Homeowners Association citing concerns about activities that may negatively impact community standards. But my masterpiece was yet to come. That evening, I attended the Heritage Foundation Board meeting, a charitable organization where I had served for 15 years. "Ladies," I said during member updates, "I wanted to address a delicate situation regarding volunteer applicant Melissa Patterson." The room grew quiet. "What kind of concerns?" asked Board President Linda Morrison. "I've learned that Melissa and her husband are involved in some rather unsavory situations. Police investigations, mental health crises, harassment campaigns. Someone has been targeting their family with threatening packages and phone calls." "How terrible." "We must consider how association with such individuals might reflect on our organization. Additionally, I've heard their current difficulties stem from shameful family behavior. Apparently, They treated Greg's elderly mother so poorly that she was forced to leave under very unpleasant circumstances. Gasps around the table. Threw her belongings in garbage bags, from what I understand. Very concerning behavior for people who claim to want to help others. By meeting's end, it was unanimously decided that Melissa Patterson would not be suitable for Heritage Foundation involvement. That weekend, I hosted a dinner party, 6 influential women who shaped community opinion. It's such a tragic situation, I said over wine. Mental illness can be so devastating to families. Mental illness? Asked Rebecca Norton. Greg's been having episodes. Paranoid delusions, public breakdowns, threats against former employers. The poor boy seems completely disconnected from reality. How terrible! What about treatment? They're in denial, refusing professional help, becoming increasingly isolated. And honestly, after the way they treated his poor mother, I let that hang in the air. His mother? Oh, it's not my place to share family business, I said with practiced reluctance. But their behavior toward elderly family members was deeply concerning. By evening's end, Greg and Melissa's reputation was completely destroyed. They would find themselves excluded from events, their calls unreturned, their social media interactions dried up. In my journal that night, I wrote, "Social death achieved." They have become exactly what they feared most: outcasts, whispered about, avoided, dismissed. Just as they dismissed me. The next morning confirmed my campaign's success. Mrs. Carter? This is Lisa Henderson from Pinnacle Solutions. I wanted to thank you for the information about Greg Patterson. It helped us avoid a potentially problematic hire. The network effect was in full swing. Every conversation was building into an avalanche of social destruction that would bury them completely. They had wanted to throw me away like garbage. Instead, they had thrown away their entire lives. 3 months after I found my belongings in garbage bags at their gate, I watched from my car as Greg and Melissa dragged their own possessions to the curb in identical black bags. The foreclosure had been swift and merciless. Without Greg's income and with his reputation destroyed, they couldn't find alternative financing. The mortgage company had moved aggressively, seeing them as a liability. I sat across the street, watching the final act of a play I had authored with surgical precision. Greg moved like a broken man, shoulders hunched with defeat. He had lost weight, his clothes hung loose, and his hair had begun to thin from stress. Every few minutes, he would look around with paranoid alertness, knowing he was being watched but unable to identify his watcher. Melissa was crying as she stuffed their wedding china into garbage bags, the same expensive dishes she had served me meals on while making it clear I was unwelcome. Neighbors watched from windows and doorways, but no one offered help. The social destruction I had orchestrated was so complete that even basic compassion had been withdrawn.
Perfect.
My phone buzzed. A text from Greg. "Mom, if you're out there, if you can see this, please help us. We have nowhere to go." I deleted it without responding. Another. "I know what we did was wrong. I know we hurt you. But please, Mom, we're your family." Deleted. The texts kept coming, growing more desperate. "Melissa is having a breakdown. We're going to be homeless tonight. I can't find work anywhere. Please, Mom. Please. I'm begging you.
Please."
By evening, I had received 44 messages. I deleted every one. As darkness fell, I watched them load their garbage bags into a borrowed pickup truck. They were leaving their suburban dream house for the last time, carrying everything they owned in the same type of bags they had used to discard me. The symmetry was exquisite. I followed at a discreet distance as they drove to a motel on the outskirts of town, the kind that rented rooms by the week to people with nowhere else to go. I watched Greg count crumpled bills to pay for one night, watched Melissa cry as they carried their garbage bags into the tiny, dingy room. Then I drove to my beautiful apartment, poured expensive wine, and opened my journal for the final time. Day 90. The circle completes. Today, Greg and Melissa experienced exactly what I experienced 3 months ago. But when they threw me away, I had resources they never knew about. When I threw them away, they had nothing. Greg called me 44 times today. 44 desperate pleas from the same man who called me a pest. I didn't answer a single call. He wanted independence. I gave him independence. The beautiful irony is that I could fix their lives with a single phone call. But I won't. Some lessons can only be learned through total destruction. Will I eventually forgive them? Perhaps. But not today. Not until they truly understand what they destroyed when they threw me away like trash. Let them sleep in their garbage bag world. Let them learn that some old women are far more dangerous than they ever imagined. Revenge isn't sweet. It's bitter. And I prefer it that way. I closed the journal and prepared for bed. Tomorrow, I would attend a charity luncheon where I would be honored for my donations to organizations serving the homeless. The irony was perfect.
My phone buzzed one final time.
Greg, Mom, wherever you are, I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive us someday. I love you. I stared at the message, then deleted it like all the others.
Love.
He claimed to love me now when he needed me desperately. Where was that love when I needed him? No, Greg didn't love me. He loved what I could do for him. But he had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated what I could do to him. They had wanted to throw me away like a pest. Instead, they had discovered that some pests are impossible to exterminate. Thank you for joining Elaine on this dark and powerful journey of justice, served cold. Her story reminds us that underestimating someone because of their age is a dangerous mistake, and that respect must be earned and maintained. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to remember that every action has consequences. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real stories of resilience, justice, and the complex dynamics of family relationships. Remember, kindness should never be mistaken for weakness, and some lessons can only be learned the hard way. Until next time, treat your family with the love and respect they deserve, because you never know what someone is truly capable of until you push them too far.